Well, welcome to another Bible Truth broadcast. I'm Evangelist Tom Gillum. I'm an itinerant evangelist who believes in expositional preaching. It's a joy to have you on the broadcast today. I hope you'll have a Bible handy if it's possible, notebook, something to write with. You'll find our text today in 1 Peter, chapter number 4. It is a little verse that I want to use as the basis of our study for the next 4 or 5 sermons in this series that we want to begin today. Peter makes this statement in verse 12, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trials which is to try you, as though some strange thing," I'm interested in those 2 words, strange thing, happened unto you. That little phrase has the idea of an alien, a foreigner, a visitor, but it also has the idea of a strange minister. On a religious level, we have some very strange ducks that we call preachers, come in all kind of packages. Fat ones and skinny ones, tall ones and short ones, loud ones and low voice, some that can sing and some that cannot sing. But the problem, if they're a man of God, they'll have a message. But often my problem is I'll get caught up in the package and miss the message. But on a far greater level than that, God has some other ministers, some other revs, if you want, that'll come by the house, and they'll also have a message. But if we're not careful, we'll get caught up in their package and miss their message. I want to look at 4 or 5 in the next few weeks of these strange ministers. And I want to begin today in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Paul had one of these strange ministers come by, and he got caught up with the package for a moment or two and was missing the message. I call it the strange minister of weakness. Paul said in verse number 7, he says, "Unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelation, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart me. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." That little word weakness is a feebleness of body. It has the idea of feebleness of mind, maladies that causes one to be weakened in body and thought, feebleness that causes one to be without strength, impotent, no ability to do little or anything. Situations I find myself in which there's no doorknobs on my side. If I get out, someone's going to have to let me out. Situations where I fall short in my ability or my strength to carry it, to do it, or to understand it. That is the strange minister that has come by to Paul. I notice, first of all, the purpose of weakness. Why would God send reverend weakness by our houses? I notice the purpose Paul gives us in verse number 7. He said, "Lest I should be exalted above measure." He says that on 2 different occasions in this text. Literally, if I could put that in just good old redneck English, lest I get too big for my britches. I noticed that God sent the message but the Bible says it was a messenger. Say, he allowed Satan to bring. Oftentimes things that Satan brings into our lives have been sent by God. And so here, this thorn, this thing that is bothering Paul, that is weakening him, reverend weakness, God has sent it, and Satan has delivered it. Job said, man's born of a woman is of a few days, and they're full of trouble. Paul has dealt with this thing of trouble before, because a lot of times we don't think God will put more on us than we can bear, or he would definitely not do that to his people. But I am assured from the scriptures, if you've got the Bible there, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, I've shared this before on broadcast. It may be more than you can bear, but it's not more than he can bear. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 1:8, for I would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble. These are these reverend weaknesses that come by these strange ministers, which came to us in Asia. We were pressed out of measure. He said, it put so much on me, it flattened me. He says, I was above strength. He said, I couldn't carry it. He said, in so much that we despaired of life. He said, I wished I was dead. He said, why in the world would God do that to the fair-haired boy who wrote over half the New Testament? He says in 2 Corinthians 1:9, but we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God which raiseth the dead. Paul said, the reason God has sent this to me is so I will not trust myself, but I'll trust him. Job's response to the revs coming by, the strange ministers, he says, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I am reminded of what David said, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to a rock that is higher than I. David said, he brought me up also out of a horrible pit, set my feet upon a solid rock, and established my goings. When reverend weakness comes by, let us run to the rock. Let us purpose, let us focus in on that rock that God has set us upon in redemption. There is the purpose of weakness. But I notice there is the principle of weakness. Your focus on the minister of weakness will cause you to miss the message. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 8, he said, for this thing I besought the Lord thrice. That little phrase thrice, we get out of thought of 3 times, but it has the idea of on and on and on, of asking him to take this away. What was happening? Paul was focused on the weakness. He was focused upon the package of the strange minister, and he was missing the message. And so God made it clear, and he said unto me, my grace, God's unmerited favor, God's ability to lift it and walk on. And it is through this that Paul says, my grace is, not that it was, not that it could be. Grace is never a could be or will be, but it is always and is. See, grace was given to you and I when he saved us, and we must believe and reckon it to be ours, and that it is a present tense and always working grace. And he says, not only is my grace is, but he said it is sufficient, more than enough, superabundance. God is more into taking care of us in our troubles than taking us out of our troubles. Old Levon Boatner used to say, God is bigger than we think, but he's always big enough. The principle of weakness. And I see in this principle, there is an oxymoron mentioned. He says in verse number 10, for my grace is sufficient, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. It doesn't make any sense. God says, when I make you feeble, when I make you powerless, when I make you needy, it is only then that my strength can be realized, my ability, my power, my ability to give you to lift it and walk on. We must see that God's principles are always the opposite in our thinking. You want to be successful, God says you must fail. You want to be rich, God says you must become poor. If you want to go up, God says you must come down. If you want to win, God says you must lose. I love the way that Steve Lawson said it. He says the gospel messages calls upon us to die that you may live, to give up that you may gain, and forsake that you may find. Weakness is principle. When it knocks at the door, we must run to the rock. We must focus in on that position in which God has set us upon, that solid rock. There is a weakness purpose. Weakness is principle. But I see weakness is perfecting. He says, my strength is only made perfect. It is only made complete. It only becomes full in your weakness. His strength only fills us when we're emptied of ourselves. He won't live in and through us until we die to what we want ourselves. He won't triumph through us until we meet defeat of our strength. That is that perfecting of weakness. I see last of all the procedure of the weakness. There is a wondrous procedure. Notice he says in 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9, he says, most gladly therefore will I rather glory in my infirmities. That little word glory has a couple of meanings. It means to lift up, to highly regard. Do not see your troubles, your infirmities, these strange ministers. Don't see them as unwelcome guests. He says to lift them up, to highly regard them, that God has counted you and I worthy to suffer anything. He says in Philippians 1, he says that not only has he given us the gift to believe, he's given us the gift to suffer. Why in this world would I want to do that? Another word for that word glory is to imprint the likeness of one upon another. So when we highly regard our troubles and do not try to shirk them or ignore them or try to get out of them, it is then that that impression of Christ is imprinted upon us. He says in verse number 9, most gladly therefore will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ might, that dunamis power, that explosive power, that Holy Ghost power, that it might rest upon me. Oh, there is a wondrous reflection. There must be in this wondrous procedure not only a wondrous reflection, but a wondrous enjoyment. He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 10, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecution, in distresses, for Christ's sake. That it is my reasonable service to highly regard, to find them as good for me. David said, it is good that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy principles and learn thy statutes, that learn thy word. He says, when I take pleasure in them, he says, for then when I am weak, it is then that I become strong. So there is a wondrous procedure. If you've got the Bible there, Romans chapter number 8, I see there is a working procedure. Just exactly how does God work? these strange ministers into our life. Why would he even do that? He says in Romans 8:29, for whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. He's making us like Jesus. How is he imprinting this upon us? He tells us in Romans 8:28, and we know this is an ongoing knowledge. It's not a one-time knowledge. It's an ongoing knowledge that when these weaknesses come, we focus in on the rock that we're standing upon, and we begin to see that all things work together for good to everybody. No. To them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. He says they work together. Reminded of that little phrase, and I'm sure I've told this story before on the broadcast. It has the idea of kneading dough. Kneading dough. When I think about that, I am reminded today I can't stand buttermilk. I was raised in a buttermilk family. Grandma and Mama, they always had buttermilk. At night, I've seen them do the cornbread, the onion thing. When I was little, I tried a little bit of it, and man, that didn't get past my atoms. I spit it right back out. Later on in life, maybe around 19, I thought it was a mature drink. So I tried it again. It didn't get as far that time as it got before. And I just cannot stand buttermilk. Years ago, I was holding a meeting for a fella and had a number of children. It was up in Alaska in the dark hours, and kids were very wide open kids, like so many are. And she had cleared the kitchen out, and she floured the kitchen floor, and they was in there skating. I was sitting in the living room studying. I could see them in there skating. One of them, he skated by his mama's flour bin, took him some flour and was eating it. I thought that was horrible. And then I saw another one skate by his mama's lard bucket. He got some lard. I was eating it like ice cream. And sitting right there in that living room in Alaska, I learned a great truth, that I don't like anything that's in biscuits. But I've never met a biscuit that I didn't like. It's because somebody has taken several things that I don't like, buttermilk, flour, lard, worked them together and created something that I not only like, but I love. Oh, when the strange minister of weakness comes by, let us run to the rock, focus in on the rock on which God has set us. When all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. Strange minister of weakness comes by. Let us be careful to run to the rock. It's been a joy to have you here on the broadcast today. Thanks for listening.